Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Now this one is actually based on my medical history with the whole incentive to be that you take something away from this and learn from the mistakes that I've had to go through over the past 20, 30 years. So I'm going to pick out key areas throughout my medical history and like I said, hopefully you take something from that you can implement into your own lifestyle, or it just gives you a new insight into how health can look in another dimension. So it starts in 2005 when I was 9 at the time, and I was diagnosed with a rare form of diabetes called Glucokinase MODY. And basically, this form of diabetes, it means that my blood sugar will be raised, but I have no increased risk of complications, well, according to recent studies. I don't require any treatment and no longer require annual monitoring. So looking back, when I was diagnosed, I actually don't think people understood what it was at the time, because if you ask a lot of healthcare professionals now, no one really understands what it is. But from that point, I was tested from, I think, a period of 3 weeks where every morning I was going for a blood test before school. I was having my breakfast in the hospital after the blood test. But eventually, once I got told that it was this rare form of diabetes, I then had to go back every year and get it monitored up until the age of 23 when I was actually discharged. So the point is, I actually didn't modify my lifestyle as a child. I was very active. I was playing footy. I was always outside, something that you don't really see much these days. I was always riding a bike. So there wasn't really any reason to change what I was doing. I was always lean. I've never been overweight. So when I turned 18, I then changed my lifestyle approach completely. I went on a couple of lads' holidays to Magaluf and I went to Malia. And then when I come back from the second one of them two holidays, I then cut out all junk food. I cut out fast food, sugary drinks, chocolate, fizzy drinks, you name it. And the idea behind that at the time, so I was just going into university to study pharmacy. And it was this idea that if I can't go to the gym on certain days, I don't want to put on fat. That was the whole reason why I didn't do it. And I was always scared, mongered from a young age about this rare form of diabetes, in the sense that if I don't look after myself, I could develop type 2 diabetes and require treatment. And at the time, they used to scare me with this idea of being on injectable insulin. So I changed it at that point, went through pharmacy school, and then just as I'd finished my degree, so this was in 2017, I was doing a pre-registration year. So I was in the hospital in Blackpool where you've got to do a foundational year before you qualify and take your full test. And I was fully discharged from the diabetic service at that point. Now, that was the last time I ever had a blood test. And the reason I'm bringing this up is my HbA1c, which is a marker of diabetes, at that time was 51. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the reference range is anything above 48 is classed as diabetes. Now, I never got told of this result until I looked into my results recently. And the point that scared me was at that time in my life, I was having protein shakes left, right, and center. I was in the gym 1 to 2 times a day, because when you're in university, you've got all this free time. It's not actually as intense as what you think it would be. And I'd say body fat percentage, I was a lot leaner than what I was now. I had a lot more muscle and I could lift a lot more. So on the face of it, I was quite healthy. But when I look back now, I was literally left unattended to with this really high abnormal result, which is quite scary, really. And this is one of the other motivational factors of why I've started this blood testing company. But yeah, so in 2017, I was discharged. And then I was left to my own devices, really. And I really hunkered down on diet and lifestyle, because I then went into hospital settings for work, seeing a lot of the poor health and decisions that a lot of people were taking that led them into heart attacks and strokes, and thought, okay, I might look into this a bit more. And then back in January of 2024, I actually ended up having stress-induced colitis. Now, if anyone knows me, I don't really talk about any issues that I've got going on. I don't open up about anything. And on the face of it, I thought I coped with things quite well. But back in January of 2024, I had an episode of colitis, which it was probably the worst experience I've had, constantly on the toilet. I ended up having to go for a colonoscopy. And the reason being was, obviously, they found maybe some blood in the stools, but I've got a bowel cancer risk within my family as well. So my nan passed away at 66. Her mum, I think, passed away from bowel cancer, and I think her mum again. So there's this high genetic risk within the family. So I got put towards a colonoscopy, which I don't advise anyone do because it is unpleasant. I got sedated, obviously. And then they just found out that it was stress-induced colitis. So from that point, we opened up a podcast. And the reason being was I was in A&E for 14 hours. No one really knew what was going on. And the people that were in A&E, a lot of the issues could have been solved outside of it. And I just thought the state of our healthcare was quite poor at that point, that people had just been funneled into A&E without any reason to be there. And then once they're in A&E, we're just quickly getting them in the door and out, not really solving any issues, because my diagnosis at the end of it didn't really come with any advice. I'm not blaming the doctors, by the way, but it just didn't feel very attentive compared to what I would do normally in a clinic. But after that, I obviously had to go for blood tests during this period. And this is when I got my cholesterol redone, because I haven't had one done for years and I didn't have it on record. And when it comes through, my cholesterol was really raised. So that was total cholesterol. LDL cholesterol was raised, non-HDL cholesterol raised. So my risk, looking at that from a cardiovascular point of view, was not the best, which was quite surprising really, because I've had a couple of body fat percentage scans since then. I linger around the 10.5, 11% without any cutting or any strenuous activity. But then my dad, he had 2 heart attacks, one at 50, one at 51. So this, for anyone who's got any first degree relatives who've had a heart attack, this increases your risk dramatically under the age of 60, but especially when they're 50 and below. And then this is why we started looking into, what is this preventative health? How can we go about it in this way? So on the face of it, we were eating healthy. I've never counted calories, by the way, but we did have a look at the calorie model. We were within the reference ranges that you would like. Fat, I will actually say what my diet was. So I did monitor it one day in, I think it was late 2023. And I think my total fat for the day was, I want to say 58 grams. Saturated fat was around the 21 grams. Protein, about 220 grams. Carbohydrates, they weren't high. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think they were around 200 grams. So from an objective point of view, nothing wrong. Physically, I was lifting heavy weights. I was able to run fast times in whatever I was doing. I had a decent VO2 max. And then when I got the results back, I thought, okay, well, there's something else that's going on here. So this is why we looked into this next level, like I said, preventative health. And this is what's led on to this new company called BioLite, which we're offering blood testing for people that wouldn't normally go to a GP. So if I didn't have diabetes, I don't go to the GP. I still don't go to the GP. And it's this idea that if you do, why are you there? So if you've got no medical conditions, if you're not acutely unwell, generally the NHS doesn't have the funds and the capacity to see such people. So after looking into this preventative health and certain biomarkers, so blood tests that we don't normally offer within the NHS, we went for a private test through a charity. Actually, it was Randox. I think it was the Tim Cogley Foundation, which was based in Liverpool at the time, and they offered advanced metrics into your cardiovascular health. So that fitted with me because of the genetic history with my dad. And bear in mind, his dad's got angina. His granddad had, I think he died at 48 with a heart attack. His nan's had a stroke, both sides. So it's littered with it. Whether that's due to genetics or the fact that a lot of people who were in the family tree tended to smoke a lot, drink a lot, all these things, I don't know. It's hard to choose between the two, basically. But there's a good genetic link there. And we looked into it, and my risk come back at quite high over the general population. And then we wondered, how can we offer this to other people where it's accessible? And that's when it really became a big passion for me and my partner Jess at the same time, where we went into all this information to try and get that message out there to people that it doesn't matter how you look in terms of how you work out, your physical performance, anything else. It's all about what's going on within your body, which can be genetically led, but also a lot of it can be combated and prevented through lifestyle And when I say lifestyle, it could be diet, it could be activity, social impact, stress, which clearly I don't manage enough. And I've probably gone off on a tangent here, but the whole point of reciting my medical history was if I actually didn't look into my health a bit more within certain circumstances and obviously didn't pursue a degree within pharmacy and look into preventative health, I could have been left on a trajectory for a poor metabolic health and profile. I could have ended up with type 2 diabetes if I hadn't have gained this motivation to go to the gym, eat healthy. And the funny thing is, the more I look into all the science, thinking that when I walked out of university 8, 9 years ago, I thought, oh, I know all this about the body, how medications work to this high degree. And ironically, over the past year to 18 months, I've learned more than what I did do throughout the whole degree foundation year. And I actually think I know less than what I actually know. So I know that there's a lot more out there that I need to explore. And that's the whole point of this. It's being honest with people to show that I'm on this journey at the same time with everyone else. I don't have the answers, and no one does. No one at this moment in time has beaten the time clock of death. I know Brian Johnson is out there trying to fund a lot of these longevity aspects, clinics, whatever you want to call it, but he still won't beat death. He's trying to get humans up to the age of 150. In my opinion, to live up to a centenarian, you've got to really have a good set of genes, which we've established there are certain genetic makeup that will push you in this direction, but also you've got to implement it early on. So in terms of my lifestyle, I cut out a lot of the bad stuff at 18, but I did socially drink alcohol because of the culture where I'm from. It's a big thing, whether you go and watch the footy, everything you do revolves around alcohol. And if you didn't go to, well, if you didn't drink at an event, it's like an insult to someone else who is drinking because it's the normal thing to do, especially within these major cities in the UK. So I stopped drinking I actually stopped drinking when my dad had his first heart attack because he was a massive drinker at the time. And I'm trying to think of how long that's been. It's been January, late January 2023. So come up to 2.5 years at some point. So I've tried to mitigate my risk that way. And as I sit here now, I've still got a genetic form of diabetes that will never go. It's a faulty enzyme, which it's a bit of a pain for me, but I've obviously got to keep combating it. And at the moment, I'm waiting for another blood test to see what my genetic link is with cardiovascular disease in terms of this one called LPA, if anyone knows what that is. But I could have left it all in terms of I could have just carried on living the way I was. I wasn't really getting any symptoms from any of the conditions that I do have or any risk factors. So I would never have known. I would have never been any of the wiser. But it's this idea that it's the balance between how much should you know in terms of your health metrics, and the world's becoming more and more interested in finding out what the body's doing. We've got brands like Whoop, we've got Apple Watches, Garmin's, all these things giving us metrics about mainly the cardiovascular system. How well are you sleeping? How well is your heart rate variability? There's a new beta version where I think you can look at your blood pressure now on Whoop. All these metrics that were never around 10 years ago. So we are becoming more thirsty for data. And the next step, in my opinion, is to go to blood work. Again, there's a lot more companies coming out with this. There's companies which are tailoring supplements to your blood work, which is a better way to go. Again, I don't know how regulated the supplement industry is going to become, but in the UK, it's still not the best over pharmaceutical grade materials. And we've gone a long way off where I originally started the video. So when I come to edit it, it's going to be quite funny, but I suppose that's what happens when you don't have any script and you just come to sit down and record a video. But yeah, overall, the message is that my medical history isn't the best. It's not the worst. Looking at me, you probably wouldn't assume any of them conditions are affecting me in any way whatsoever. But the fact is that my blood work is showing a big story. And it's led to me changing up my complete regime. So like I've said, I've cut out alcohol. I've never smoked, never used any illicit drugs. I've stopped all the junk food. I've gone to this higher organic food diet, if you want to say that, in terms of the only ultra processed food that I have in my diet at the moment are oat milk, just because I cut out the sugar and it's actually something I enjoy. And I've obviously conceded to the fact that I'm not going to live forever. So I don't think oat milk's going to really knock many years off my life. And that's, I mean, maybe the odd sauce, which might be ultra processed, but that's really it for me. But in terms of training, that's completely changed. So when I started the gym about 16, 17, it was mainly aesthetic, it was bodybuilding, and that really carried on until I'd say 21, 22. I was obviously playing footy at the same time and I was still running. But then I started going towards functional fitness, and I'd say over the past 2 years, I've completely changed it up. Mobility, I mean, I'm only 30, going 31 in September. My flexibility, mobility has completely decreased to a point where my hamstring, I'm getting lower back spasms at 30, 31 because I'm not using the hip flexors, hamstrings, or even core in the right way possible. So that's really forced me to go down that avenue. VO2 max, something I talk about a lot within podcasts and whatever I put on social media. It's apparently the best marker of longevity that we've got. It's also horrible to train for because you've got to do 80% of your cardiovascular training. So whether that be spin, jogging, it could be on the Stairmaster, whatever that is, 80% of your time that you spend needs to be in zone 2. Now, a lot of people have, like I said, Garmin's, Whoops, so you can determine what that is for you in terms of heart rate. If you don't, just keep doing it until you can't hold a conversation and just go a bit before. That's your zone 2. So 80% of the time is that, and then the other 20% is at full effort. So that's the bit that I don't really fancy, but that's the main component in terms of pushing your aerobic capacity, the ability of your body to utilize oxygen. And these are all things that you do when you're younger without really paying much attention to it. But now I've actively got to look into these things. But at the same time, still doing strength training and try and build as much muscle, because for me, building as much muscle allows the glucose within the body and the blood sugar to be regulated to a greater extent, because the muscle is a reservoir for sugar. And strength is important. When you get older, you need to have good strength in terms, even just getting off a chair. You've got to be able to squat, body weight. You've got to be able to go down the stairs, balance, and all them things. So yeah, that's a general overview of what I think people should be doing. It's took me a long time to get to the point where I am, all through trial and error. So if you have made it this far, hopefully you've found something that you might take away and implement in your own life. But before I go, I have set a new challenge for myself over the next 6 weeks. So I'm going to try and improve my strength, my VO2 max, and my mobility. And the way I'm measuring these, so VO2 max is quite easy. I've got a spin bike. I can do an FTP test, which is a functional threshold power. It's a 20-minute activity, and that basically works out how many watts of power that you put out over that time. I think they times it up to 60 minutes and minus 5%, just to get what your power outage is over that time. So I've already done my baseline. So I'm going to reassess that in 6 weeks, which again, like I said, I don't look forward to that one because that one's grueling. Strength, I've just picked an overhead barbell press. It's something that I've been half decent at in the past. I think the best I ever got to was 100 kilos for 2-3 sets of 3, I think it was. I did that the other day. 1 rep max was 80 kilos. Now my body weight's 77, but still not where I want it to be. So I'm going to retest that again in 6 weeks' time. And then for mobility, I'm going to be doing hip, hamstrings, I'm going to be doing core exercises, whatever that is on offer. And the way I'm going to assess this is by doing a yoga flow, which is mainly focused on the lower body, because when I do a yoga flow, it is the hardest activity that I can think of doing. It just puts me under an immense amount of stress. So when I finish it, I feel so relieved. And it's basically going to be off my perceived rate of exertion once I do that yoga flow. At the moment, I would say doing an intermediate flow is one of the hardest things I can do. So if in 6 weeks' time that becomes quite manageable, I'm going to class that as a success. So what I'm going to do for future videos is that I might start clipping a bit of that journey, that whole process, do a few workouts in it, maybe film it over a couple of days instead of doing it over one, where I'm trying to cram it all into one video. But again, this is all about trial and error. And if you've made it this far, thank you, and I will see you in the next one.